It's easier to get started on this stuff than I think people make it out to be.
Welcome to Velocitize Talks. I'm Andy North, and today my guest is Adam Lovallo, founder at Thesis. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
You've described Thesis as a company focused on conversion rate optimization and growth marketing. Tell us about your company and what sets it apart in the marketplace.
Sure. So, honestly, in many respects, aspects of our work are basically indistinguishable from every other digital agency on the planet. You know, we're buying Facebook ads and Google ads on behalf of mostly e-commerce businesses. Thesis' focus, our focus, is on conversion rate optimization, just generally speaking, like recognizing that the media buying itself is getting increasingly concentrated with a handful of companies, Facebook and Google namely, and the actual means by which you buy traffic, do paid advertising is becoming automated, like largely automated. So in a world in which there's a ton of automation, I don't really think that the media buying in and of itself is that valuable. Like it's kind of going away. So we say, all right, well, where can you still make these businesses more efficient? Certainly if you help them convert more, I mean, that lifts all boats. And so we've got a whole sort of practice and team focused on conversion rate optimization. And then there's a creative side of our business too, which is equally as important. But yeah, that's Thesis in a nutshell. We primarily are working with direct-to-consumer sort of challenger brands. That's kind of my background in bread and butter. Yeah, that's our company in a nutshell.
What would you say are some of the bigger challenges your clients face when it comes to optimizing their conversion rates?
A couple things. One, a lot of times the marketing organization is distinct from the product organization internal to these companies. And so you might have a lot of money flowing into these paid search campaigns and this Facebook and all of this paid advertising, but it's driving to a really suboptimal product page, or you dump the person on what is essentially a navigational shopping page that just lists the thousands of sweaters you have. Like you go from this really crafted audience targeting strategy to this really thoughtful ad creative that talks about all of the amazing elements of your product or products. And then you just like randomly put them on a page on their phone that just like lists 50 sweaters with no context. There's nothing unique about them. You could be on any e-commerce website on the internet, that's one of the truisms I think of e-commerce in particular. Like every product page basically looks identical. Every browse page basically looks identical. So that to me can be a pain point. It's like, all right, well, maybe that's where you start to use landing pages, which is a big part of our work, to say, all right, well, we know we're running a campaign targeting these types of people. We know we're describing our line of sweaters in this way. Before we just put them on a page of one of those products with a buy now button, maybe we should take a little bit more time to introduce them to our collection. It's made by hand, the wool is so special, all this kind of stuff.
So given the acceleration of e-commerce and digital marketing during the pandemic, is that becoming a wider issue, and how can marketers help get past that last mile?
Okay, so in every single category that I work on, or almost every single category, everybody's doing amazing, like it's a lift all boats situation in terms of e-commerce growth. So I don't necessarily think that the problem that I described, this like kind of bridging the gap between the acquisition effort and the actual transaction, is exacerbated in any way by COVID. It just is, it has always, I think, been kind of an issue. But the good news is there are a ton of self-service tools that allow you to build landing pages, a ton of client-side JavaScript tools that allow you to build little like pop-up interstitial experiences. And those are systems, tools that really don't require significant development resources or help. And so you can get going pretty quickly. Our business is one in which, we're maybe going to like a higher level of complexity than you might be able to achieve via something self-service. And we're, hopefully driving a lot of strategy, but it's easier to get started on this stuff than I think people make it out to be.
There's been a lot of buzz about values-driven marketing and how brands are now leaning in with their values as part of the sales process. Are you seeing that with any of your customers, and do you see it affecting conversion at all?
Most of my clientele are kind of in this D2C world, right? So the types of brands like Warby Parker and Casper, that sort of ecosystem. And those brands, not all of them, but many of them, were very quick to make some sort of social good or values-based, as you said, a central tenet from their launch as a point of differentiation. So not every single D2C brand has some plan or component of, give back or profit share. Some are much more sincere than others, but most of them do, okay? I think that sort of articulation is really, really beneficial, especially at launch, just as a point of differentiation. Because you could say, hey, I've re-engineered the sock, right? People buy socks, everybody's got socks, but I've re-engineered the sock. And you know what makes one of the reasons why my re-engineered socks are different is this really awesome social good program. And what's motivating me to do this? Bombas is the reference example I'm alluding to. And they're probably one of the most successful executions of this sort of a strategy. That said, 5 years down the road, right? You're now way past launch. Is that social good program really, if you look at the conversion rate numbers, I'm going to include it in my marketing or I'm not? What's the impact? I would argue that it's pretty de minimis at that point. Like, it's almost now kind of an expectation, I think, of consumers that there's something like that behind the scenes of this business. And so I don't think you get nearly as much conversion rate credit for having that sort of program or plan in place than maybe you did when you were first launching and you really had to differentiate.
One of the questions we like to ask all our guests is, if there's one thing you could change about digital marketing or marketing at large, what would it be?
So my biggest critique, my biggest problem in my day job is like making sense of what is actually real. And there's a whole discipline around incrementality measurement. This is exactly what it sounds like. What are the sales that are incremental? What's my incremental return from this investment? I wish that the digital advertising ecosystem made that more of a central tenet or feature of how their stuff works. To be fair, Facebook has. So theirs is probably the most readily available and robust incrementality measurement tool that anybody could use. But that's my biggest pain point. It's like, well, you went from a world in which you have offline sales, quite difficult, though not impossible, to attribute the efficacy of your marketing via TV and radio and direct mail and all these things, to then being in the world where you have these websites and you have pixels and it tells you exactly, oh yeah, our cost per purchase was $7. But then there's so much overlap and there's so much ambiguity and there's so much credit being taken by these platforms that is really not merited, that it actually becomes difficult to tell what is really driving results.
Another one of the questions we like to ask is, what is the best advice you've either heard or been given?
The best advice that I've gotten, I can't even really pinpoint this to one person, is just like, okay, well, you're going to lead a cross-functional organization. You should at least have a base understanding of what each of those groups do. You don't have to be able to write all the code yourself, but wouldn't kill you to spend 10 hours on some online site learning basic JavaScript, because then when you talk to the engineer, you're gonna kind of get what they're saying. Same goes for UX, same goes for design, same goes for each of the digital marketing specialties. So I always encourage my own colleagues, my own team members, to be like, hey, we're in this cross-functional ecosystem. That's what growth marketing is. You should have a rudimentary understanding of each piece of it, and then you go really deep in the thing that you're an expert in.
That's great advice, and it allows for a more empathetic environment so people understand when a deadline is missed because something is very challenging. At least they have a feeling of why.
Exactly right. And to put on my cynical hat for a second, the inverse, which is like somebody says, no, we can't do it. It's going to take 6 months. If you could say, oh, really? Okay. Well, I'm a horrible JavaScript developer. Let me do it. I'll deploy the code to the server. And then suddenly the counterparty will be like, okay, no, that's not going to happen. But all right, well, maybe, there is a little, maybe I padded the plan, a little bit. Okay, now let's talk about it. So I think, cuts both ways for sure.
Is there a book, a blog, or a podcast you'd like to recommend to our viewers?
There's a really great book called Traction. There's a few of them, but there's a Traction book specifically pertaining to growth marketing. It's written by two very well-respected growth marketing sort of luminaries or, thought leaders. I think it's spectacular. Chapter by chapter, they talk about major channels one by one. I recommend that book to everybody. That would be my growth marketing kind of, jump starter book.
My guest today has been Adam Lovallo, founder at Thesis. Adam, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.